Dude, you're in Austin, Texas. I keep seeing your good-looking face pop up with a tournament that you're a part of now. I was trying to navigate whether you'd moved over there or if you're just there for a fight or a few fights.
I've been here now 7 months. Obviously split up because I've got a. I had just an ESTA before, so that gave me 90 days to be here. And this time I have a 6 month visa. I'm planning to be here till July. So in total, I'll have spent a year here in Austin by the end of that. Yeah.
Far out, man. And you're there, is it specifically for your fighting or is it a strategic move with comedy as well? Because, man, you're the kind of guy, I've seen your face around a few times, obviously, and there's been plenty of sets in Melbourne that I've appreciated and liked. And I always enjoy when you're in the room. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to sit down and have a chat with you, man. And I've seen a few of your Instagram things coming through, and I'm like, all right, there's a little spark about this bloke that I wanted to uncover a little bit more. And bro, I don't know if you know, but my background is in the distance running scene. So I used to run at a fairly high level in the world of distance running before I got involved in stand up. So whenever I meet someone competing at a high level in whatever it is that they're doing, I feel like there's an immediate level of respect, but also curiosity because I find it interesting how much just discipline and training and certain approaches to whatever sport or whatever activity is that you're a part of seem to correlate so well with each other. So dude, give me the rundown. So was it a comedy move or a jiu-jitsu move that got you over there or you just listened to too much Joe Rogan and you've jumped
Ah,
on?
definitely a jiu-jitsu move. I was doing a lot of like Buddhist style meditation retreats, and that's a pretty. It's going to take up a lot of your. I was living at these centers, so it was like a full time commitment. That's all I was doing was trying to get good at mindfulness, like meditation practice. And then I was actually in a lot of these facilities. They keep your phone, so you don't have access to a phone. So you just one of the days when I did get the phone back, I saw there was a tournament coming up, usually held like somewhere in Asia, and it's a very prestigious tournament. Um, Occasionally, Aussies will win it. It's a pretty big deal. Only a handful of Aussies have won it. And that year, in a few months, it was going to be held in Australia. So my thinking was the money I would have otherwise have spent to travel to Singapore or someplace to do this tournament, I can put that towards training and actually improving. Because even though, yeah, you get a lot of value out of competing, being able to stay in a place long term with some really good guys, you're going to get more in terms of skill development in jiu-jitsu by doing that. So that was my thinking is, okay, I've got three
So is this an
months.
eight?
Let me
Yeah.
just kind of see.
Go on, brother.
This
Sorry,
was
there's a little lag there, man. There's a little lag there, so I cut you off without meaning to. I mean, it's the beauty and the curse of technology. I can talk to you while you're in Texas, but every now and then I'm going to interrupt you.
no stress. No, there was this was back uh, about over a year ago, around a year ago now. So this is all said and done. And what also ended up happening was the tournament, due to at the time there was still COVID restrictions. They couldn't get some of the staff and tournament people in, like referees, and because of that, they pushed the tournament back another 3 months. So after I'd done my first little stint here, I kind of went home, and then I came in a matter of weeks. I was back in Austin for another long stint of just training, and then also the comedy I was doing on the second trip. I started doing more stand up, trying to get gigs in here and there. The only reason I'm doing a lot more jiu-jitsu here is the access in terms of environment and people I have to people in the jiu-jitsu world is very high level. But the gigs that I'm doing here are kind of pretty ordinary, kind of your kind of entry level comedy gigs. So if I could, go to the Vulcan and do a spot with Rogan, then I would obviously fucking be going hard on the comedy. But because the guys I've got access to are just very high level in this field, it just makes sense for me to do this.
Mm. I think the last time I saw you, we were at the Clyde in Carlton here in Melbourne, and I just seen you, and I was amazed at the size that you put on, the muscles. That you hurt my hand a little bit when we shook hands. I thought, hang on, what's Bobby done? and,
Steroids,
what was that?
steroids.
That's right, brother. That's right. We've got the same approach. I'm going to need that because I'm training for a marathon. So in about 9 months, I'm going to have to hit you up for a script. But but dude, you were telling me there. I was asking you about the preference between comedy and jujitsu, and I think you were saying that the main focus at the moment is jujitsu. You've got the bug, and as you say, like the access that you have to the other competitors and people training in the sport seems like it's at another level where you're at right now. Is that right? That's your main priority from this point or at this point?
Just as a like focus, a phase of life, I think I've already got some injuries and the knees and that, so it's very difficult to just have keep up like a regimen of just lots of training and not letting other things kind of get in the way of being the main focus of your life. It's easier to do that when you're younger. It's easier to handle training volume when you're a bit younger. Um, I have heard this that you actually peak late 20s, early 30s. But by then, there's definitely a lot of miles that you've put on your body, and it's not as bad as some of the other combat sports. Definitely striking and mixed martial arts, wrestling. They're also very tough on the body also, but definitely, especially, I think my body type. I think a lot of like kind of lankier, longer guys who they maybe don't have enough. Their joints aren't as strong. You get injuries and stuff. So at least the next few years, it's something I want to do. I think 'cause it's just I'm more likely to be successful at this age. Whereas with comedy, I think it's kind of the opposite. Even I think you put enough time into anything, it doesn't really matter your age. But I think comedy is something I can do in my 50s, whereas compete compete well in jiu-jitsu. I always want to be involved with jiu-jitsu in some capacity, even if it's I'm teaching a kids class. But to do jiu-jitsu and get and be very good and be competitive against the best guys and see how good I'm going to get, that's going to happen like you know around this time. And there's a lot that I have to do that I can only do, I feel like, at this stage of life.
It's a really good point, man. Yeah, there's definitely a difference between like the physical limitations that hit you when you get into your. I guess it depends on your age, and there's some exceptions to the rule. I'm not sure if it's the same in jiu-jitsu, but in the running world, which I know you have some guys who are still fairly elite or very elite into their late 30s. Once you hit that 40 and early 40s, I don't know what goes on there. I imagine a lot of it is actual your body's inability to be able to keep up with the workload. But then maybe the mental side of things, you start to shift into other priorities as well. I like that about comedy. That's one of the things I love. I'm 35 at the moment. I got involved in
Mm.
comedy at 31. And I like the fact that so long as your mind's still on, the enjoyment's still there, the work ethic's still there. I mean, there's not really any reason why you can't do comedy at a high level until you're 74. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how old. I think a bloke like Louis C.K., who's at the top of his game now, must be mid to late 50s, and man, he's as good as he's ever been. I went and saw him here in Melbourne, and yeah,
Wow.
there's no signs of slowing down. But I mean, you put him in a jiu-jitsu ring or on an athletics track and say, let's go. It's
Yeah.
in fairness. I mean, he's got a pop belt and he hadn't been alerted to the fact we were going to fight. But you put him on a stage and he's good to go, man. Dude, was the I was curious to pick your brain before I forget. You mentioned these Buddhist retreats, the meditation retreats that you're a part of. One of the things, and I listened to Hickson Gracie's autobiography a while ago,
Oh
and
wow.
I got the understanding that a lot of the guys who are at the top of their game in the world of martial arts are very interested into not necessarily Buddhism, but they have some form of spiritual practice, and that correlation between the two those two focuses, that spirituality and the actual fighting, they seem to go hand in hand. So I was curious to unpack that a bit with you. What the inspiration, because you're an Indian dude, aren't you? Like, yeah, there's a few Buddhists in India, but it's mostly Hindu, I would have guessed. So I'm guessing it's not like a
Oh,
family baton pass.
yeah. I mean, look, uh, I think most of a lot of the athletes I've met at a high level, they don't do it, so it's not something that's super uniform. Um, some people do find value in it. I think as a general thing, there's been isolated things like a basketball team here in the sports world. They've working with a mindfulness coach or trying some kind of practice. What got me into it was I'm a big Sam Harris guy. I like a lot of his ideas, and he's kind of like a rational thinker, more science based guy. That's kind of my line of thinking, and he had basically a good pitch for it. I remember I'd done the Headspace app earlier when I was a bit younger, and it wasn't anything like particularly crazy, but I found it interesting. This idea of being able to observe, sorry, your thoughts and get to know yourself better, and also like like what thoughts and feelings are, how they affect the quality of your life. You know, like people like self talk kind of stuff in personal PHP. That stuff kind of interested me. So there was like an interest thing there, and I could see how like nerves are interesting. You know, everyone feels like competition day nerves, and I could see potentially how something like that could have, you know, like some kind of performance enhancing benefits, having some kind of a practice. Um, yeah.
Yeah, man, it's a good way to start. I certainly appreciate that. Like the competitive side of things, it's weird. You can see people who train very well. I always find this interesting. Like I used to line up against people, and in a training session, it was almost like race day. There was something about their ability to turn it on there. But then you would line up on the track, and there was something about the atmosphere on the day, whether it was nerves or whether it was tension or whether it was you can't put your finger on it exactly, but there's certain people. Hickson Gracie seems like one of these kind of guys in my sport. Usain Bolt's another guy. You look at him and you know he's nervous, and you know
Mm.
it's a big meeting. You know it's important, but some of the guys seem to have the ability to stand back a little bit from whatever it is that they're experiencing, whether the thoughts or the emotions or the combination of those two things, and go, okay, well, they're there, but I've still got a job to do. And I always say, I think the athletes that are at the very top of the game, with a few exceptions, they always seem to be the athlete, like Usain Bolt again, they always seem to be the athletes who not only are they physically the most talented on the start line, but they seem to be the most relaxed. Like it takes a lot to really throw them out. Like yeah, you don't see him there sweating and stressing and getting all up. He's usually high fiving and flirting with the girls at the start line, giving the guys fist bumps and waving to the crowd. And there's certainly something in that, and that was part of the reason I sort of got involved. And I've done the trial on Sam Harris's app, and I really liked
Oh,
it.
that's it.
Yeah, I did that. I don't know if you know Nathan Hugh Robert here in Melbourne.
I don't. Not Hugh Robertson.
Nah, not Hugh Robertson. No, everyone knows Huey Robertson. Nathan Hugh Robert is he's a little more quietly spoken, real humble guy, but very interesting guy to talk to. And I had him on the podcast in its early days, and yeah, he spoke to me about the Sam Harris app, and I'd always been an Alan Watts fan. I listened to a couple of his lectures,
Wow,
and
wow.
I jumped on the podcast and saw they had a whole collection of his. So I was very curious, but I sort of the trial fizzled out, and for whatever reason, I didn't jump on board with it. I like him too, but I haven't. Dude, I came into Sam Harris with an interesting mindset because I met my wife at a church. I'm a Christian, and I
Wow.
remember and there's plenty that you can fault Christianity on. Like you can throw a lot at Christianity. It's not that hard if you look a couple of years back and not even that far if you are if you're real curious. But I remember the thing that threw me off with him years ago was I heard him do like a critique of Christianity, and I was like, dude, that's the most like that's a ridiculous critique, and I felt like he for such a smart guy, he didn't give it a real. He was capable of a way better critique than he did, and I'm like, I would never be a part of that if that's all it was. And I think it left like a slight bad taste in my mouth. So ever since then, I've been like, I love Sam Harris, and I know you're smart, but I just when I hear his voice a little bit, I still maybe I need to do some more meditation, bro. I still get like a little bit riled up, but
Yeah.
he's hey, to get back to my original point, he's definitely got an incredible capacity to break down complex ideas and help. That's what I noticed with the trial. Help you break down these complex ideas and sort of implement them. And I like the way he walked through a meditation technique because it wasn't that I've got such a low tolerance for that real woo woo in your face kind of
Oh,
spirituality.
that's the same as fake martial arts. You know, like there's nothing irks me more.
Oh, dude, I've watched a couple of Instagram clips, and the martial arts videos are the things that get me inspired to try. Because I'm like, if this guy could just touch the guy on his left shoulder, and that guy does a backflip and gets thrown into the wall, I'm real interested. But
This,
it does your head
this,
in, huh?
and partly people sometimes would say to me, "Oh, Bobby, like, why do you care? Like, why do you go so hard on it?" And I'm like, I know the benefits that a serious athletic, uh, any athletic kind of skill, even like running, I know how much mentally, physically, even spiritually, something like that can do for you as you stick with it and how you grow and what it makes you. And I'm like, this is pretending to do that, but it's a fraud. Like what you're getting, it's not what you're promised. Whereas you could just, there's people who could you could just do
Mm.
rugby and you would be in better shape to defend yourself than going to a martial arts expert and doing martial arts training. So that's and I'm sure they don't believe that. But if a real athletic rugby player just ran through one of these people, they wouldn't have any idea how to stop it. And if, as someone who's supposed to specialize in self defense, and you're telling people you have that skill and that's you're qualified to do that, and you put ideas in people's head, you make them think they're more capable than they are. They're in a situation where they could have otherwise avoided the situation, but they think, oh, I'm a fucking kung fu purple sash. My fucking Sifu told me I can fuck people up. Like that's extremely dangerous. I worked. My family was convenient. They had like a convenience store, and I was given like some new stuff to talk about. Like if anyone ever rocks up here with a weapon, you hand the money over. Like mess around,
Mhm.
whatever. And this guy who is skinnier than I am says to me, "Oh, I've done ninjutsu, and I can make my hand like this, and I can poke through leather. And if a guy came in here with a bat or something, I know how to take care of it." And I was like, "Really? If a guy came in here with a bat, you could take care of it?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, I could. They've been showing us." And I said to him, "Have you ever even tried this with a pool noodle? Has anyone ever tried to swing a pool noodle at you? And have you successfully avoided being hit?" Because I think if you ran that experiment 10 times, I did a thing here in Texas one time. We had like we're going to say it was a pretend pistol. Um, and we were mucking around with like my friend was a good two-story house, and my friend was hiding somewhere, and I would have to go point it at him and say bang bang. And my friend was like, he's a like world champion grappler. He's insanely strong, like in the weight room, and the guy puts his hands on you, it's ridiculous. Even for myself, he's that much better than me, and I love jiu-jitsu, do it day in day out for almost a decade. I had the gun, and not once when I had the gun could he take the gun off me without me going bang, bang, bang. And it was the same vice versa. And also, even though I know it's a fake gun, just the tension of having to be so quick and whatever, it's a it's an impossible situation, even with extremely trained, capable people. There's nothing you can do about it. So even
Mm.
that he thought he could, it's very dangerous to walk around thinking you can. It's like imagine if you thought you were a great swimmer and then you jumped in a pool of water thinking, "Oh, fuck, I'm made to do this shit," and then you drown. Not only that, you could kill other people. You're trying to save other people. Very dangerous.
It's very funny, man. I don't know what that is. There's people in every industry that have that reputation of trying to make it look easier or trying to make themselves look better and you're right, until it actually gets put to the test, it looks very, very impressive. Like I've seen those Instagram clips. I'm 35 years old and I watched those. I was like, wait a second, like is it like a legitimate magic power? Because I hadn't done any jujitsu training. I was like, okay, this guy's it. But then, bro, the same thing's funny. Like I started going to church at a Pentecostal church. And as a result, I went down the Pentecostal rabbit hole. Bro, you want to have some fun one day? Type in Pentecostal church services just on YouTube and
With the snake,
watch some of the clips that come up there, bro. Like there's some real interesting ones and there's some real interesting interviews of people go, yeah, look, I just got caught up in the moment and I had the full control of my body, but everyone else was falling down. So I thought it was the right thing to do. And it's funny, man. Like there's so much, not, I guess it's corruption in a way, like in that context, it would be corruption when you're messing with people's spirits and minds and things like that. But it's just funny that people believe it. I've got a 2-year-old boy, and like I go in and tell him I can put my hand through concrete, and he goes, "Dad, you're my hero," and that's okay because he's 2 years old. But it's weird to have me in front of a computer, 35 years old, looking at this bloke flicking a guy in the back of the head, and this guy does 4 somersaults and land on the top of a car. I don't know what it is that make people believe that, bro. But what, just as a bloke who's been involved in jujitsu for 10 years, it just grinds your gears, huh? Because you know how much work actually goes into and the limitations of that work to an extent.
for sure. You just think like sometimes I see Aikido studio right next to a jiu-jitsu or a Muay Thai gym, and I'm like, you're spending, it's the same investment in time, it's a very similar investment with money, but the outcome is drastically different. It's worlds apart. And the other thing is just delusion. Like there's something about, I think it goes back to the meditation thing. You want to kind of know what the truth is. Like at least you want to be aware of. Like no one wants to be deluded. No one wants to be under like the spell of thinking things actually different way. That's yeah.
Mm.
And on
That's a
top
good
of that,
point, man.
like you just see, it's just it looks silly. You're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And it's also, it I I guess it doesn't really take respect away from the people who actually can do things, you know? Because
Mm.
that is the
Yeah,
thing where if there is enough of a disparity in skill and athleticism, then you can make that stuff work. So John Jones can do. He can do what he probably could death touch a lot of people, you know. Like a lot of people, like let's say if it's like a disabled guy or a small woman, like they're fucked against John Jones. He could do whatever move he wanted to. Yeah.
it's so true. I like that Joe Rogan joke in his special from a couple of years ago, where he's talking about how like just the difference between men's strength and women's strength, and John Jones is
Yeah.
that magnified. That where he's like, bro, I could. What you think? Like I could bash 1,000 of my wife and kids,
Yeah.
even if I was sick. I could, I could say like it would be so easy. Like it's a clear disadvantage. What's going on there, bro? Like when you watch I don't know what you call them, and I don't want to call them a master because clearly, by your definitions, there's no mastership going on in maybe a master manipulator or whatever. But what is going on that people are buying into that? Like they stand on the mat and the bloke touches their shoulder, and
Yeah.
they feel the need to do four rolls to the left.
I think we're not as aware of how like all the mental changes that happen. Like obviously, you feel like the same Tyson you did 10 years ago, but you're obviously a very different person, and as is everyone. So all those subtle changes, it's like, when someone gets taller, the people around them don't notice because it's very small, subtle changes. And I think in any environment and community you're a part of, that begins to mold you, irrespective of what it is. And if it's a cool place, you kind of stay cool, and you just don't notice all the little changes that happen to you. And I think that's just it was. I'm sure there was great evolutionary benefit to that because then if people have similar beliefs and similar ideas and similar actions, people get along really well, and there's a lot of strength in numbers.
Mm.
And I think we're just not aware to the extent because I just look at my life, the things that I'm doing, the person that I am in Austin is absolutely different. When you're around a bunch of comics, what do those people value? So obviously you want to also be valued, so you're going to do the actions that create value. So if you're around, like I had a housemate, and before long he was doing jiu-jitsu. Why? Because jiu-jitsu people coming in to the house all the time. He ended up getting on stage. Why? Because we're around comics all the time, and we're at and
Yeah.
around places that do those. Environment and community, I think they're huge factors that drive action and habits. So I think that's something you could, if you wanted to, I don't know, be a long distance runner, if you can put yourself in a position where you're around a long distance running community and environment, it's going to be way easier to do that. Like right now, it's so natural for me to just get up, wake up, bathroom, eat, and just go to do jiu-jitsu. And that's it's the most normal thing in the world to just do jiu-jitsu every day, to spend hours doing it, and it is oftentimes it is boring and just monotonous. Even though when you're learning and stuff, but sometimes you just have days you're like, oh, again, again, again. But that's just standard way of living, and if you're lucky, I was thinking about that today. Even I was like, man, I can't believe I was so bad for so long and I stuck with it. I guess I mean, hopefully in 5 years I look back on where I am now and I have the same idea. Um, but yeah, just that long time, and then over time you hope, okay, and eventually you will get really good.
Yeah, I always call it like it's perfect in comedy. You kind of bomb your way to the top,
Yeah.
don't you? Or you bomb your way to wherever it is that you decide that that's far enough for you. Sometimes you bomb so much you go, I'm not interested anymore. Sometimes you bomb, and as you say, you look back and you're like I've heard comedians who have been in the scene for a long time say it's weird when you see a new comedian get up, and then you come back and watch him 10 years later, and you go, wait, what happened in between that? Because this guy is exceptional. Like it's really interesting just to see the people who they get up and I mean this applies to your sport and comedy. I imagine you get up, you do something, you do it wrong, you get hurt or you get embarrassed, you go back, you watch the tape, you make an edit, you go back, you try again, and it's just that's I've got like this little slogan that I live by with comedy. It's just like you write, you perform, you edit, repeat, and that's all it is. Like that's all I got to do. I just got to write, perform, edit and repeat. And it's amazing if you can actually do that. Like the editing part is the frustrating part for me sometimes because it means you have to go back and look at all the things you did wrong and you go, oh man, I'm so shit. Like I can't believe how bad I looked in comparison to whoever else was up on stage or whoever else I was fighting or running against. But like without that honest feedback and reflection on what it is that you put out there, good luck trying to improve. Like it's easy to put your head in the sand and just pretend it's not happening. But if it really is, like surely the best thing for you is to have a mirror pointed your way so you can adjust it.
For sure. It was actually nice to hear that, just because it's also a powerful framing to go into something where there's a great expectation. You know, you really want to win or you really want to perform at a certain level, and you fall short. And that the other thing is the waves of morale. Like, to be able to stick it out, you're gonna have to go through a lot of failure. And if you can't handle that, if you crack, then you can quit. And nothing's more dangerous than quitting. That's something, some of the top coaches in the sport will talk about, is like, your body might be very weathered and tired, but watch the mental fatigue and find ways around that, because if the will to continue goes away, then it doesn't matter the state of the body. But if the state of the body is rough, you can recuperate, whatever. As long as, like, the most precious thing you have that will make you a champion is the will to want it. To want to be good, to want to win. And that's why I think it's special, because I'm sure a lot of people could become world champions in Jiu-Jitsu MMA. Maybe they're healthy, they're born, they're healthy, they're just around, happen to be very easily around people who are very knowledgeable, and it's all there. But for whatever reason, maybe they go on into a different sport or whatever. The main thing is they didn't want to, they didn't have any interest in that. Maybe they didn't have an interest in a more highly paid sport or whatever. So I think anyone who has that, people who have that, like, want to really be good at anything, that's awesome. It's a huge blessing to have that, because that's really the main thing, and maybe potentially the only thing that you need. But of course, like you said, a million stars have to align. Like, the things that the
Mm.
people at the very top, everything is dialed in, and that's why they're at the very top.
Yeah, it's interesting. Going back to what you said about your housemate who got involved in stand up and jujitsu, that proximity to power or that proximity to talent or whatever it is you want to call it, is something that stood out to me in the Hicks and Gracie book. Like, I don't know, their dad was a very he had some powerful venom, and he put it in a lot of women. And he had he had I don't know how many kids they had, but bro, I think it was like I want to say more than 20. I want to say more than 20 brothers and sisters, and like the whole crew. It sounded like from the time they were born, it was pretty much like, all right, hey, this is what Gracies do. We fight, and we adjust and we go through that whole process we were just speaking about before. And it's amazing. Like, I don't know how many world class fighters came out of that family, but from what I understand, like at least three or four of them were considered like world class.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's maybe no surprise because, like you say, like if they've got the influence of the people around them who are already a part of it, they just live and breathe jujitsu. They got that desire. Uh, Naturally, if you've got any talent, like that's going to start to come out in that environment. But I like your point about that mental fatigue. It really is the thing that stops people. Hey, and that's one thing I've noticed in comedy is a lot of the people who stop, they don't stop because they don't love comedy. They stop because they find it difficult to navigate their way through that constant disappointment. And there's so many times I'll get off stage, I'm like, oh, that one's going to hurt tomorrow morning. It's going to be painful when I wake up and think about that was my Thursday night experience. But um, there's a weird, I don't know if it's the athlete in me, but there's like a weird sick part in me that appreciates that bombing, because I know with each bomb, if I treat it well, like
yes,
that literally is the gateway into improvement, because you can go, oh, like what,
yeah.
like you looked at your shoes the whole time, Tyson, you look very scared, like let's
Right.
don't do that again.
And that mindset, the thing you said earlier about, like, the failure is actually the what you want. That's the progress. That's even reminding yourself of that is huge, because otherwise it's like, I need this, or I've said that to myself. I said that to myself with that particular tournament that brought me to America. I wanted to prepare for. I was like, oh, if I quit this, if I lose this, I'm going to quit jiu-jitsu. I've had enough. I've had enough, And luckily, you wait and you go back to it. You go back to it. But yeah,
What got you involved originally
in jiu-jitsu or comedy? Jiu-jitsu.
in jiu-jitsu? Yeah.
I saw a fight at school. There were two football players, very athletic, and they didn't have much technique, but they were just swinging wild punches at each other. And I was very small, unathletic, and I kind of just I didn't really think much about sport and physical stuff. And I realized I was like, if I'm in that situation, I've got a problem. I realized I was just like, there's if someone swing because I knew I wasn't at that time capable of moving my body in the way because just by watching those two, I could tell they had to be explosive and fast to be able to throw punches. And I was like, okay, this is probably not a new problem. I went home, I like Googled top 10 deadliest martial arts. Number one was ninjutsu, so I'm like, I'm gonna learn ninjutsu. I rang up a school. I was 14, and they told me ninjutsu is too deadly for a 14-year-old to learn, and that saved my life. Otherwise, I would have never learned anything. And there was a local school, and they had like a big billboard that was on my. I could see it during my bus route to school. So it was close by, and my idea was I'm gonna learn this pussy MMA shit until I can learn ninjutsu, and that's when I discovered jiu-jitsu, Brogan, all this stuff, and that was the one I went. I thought I was more into jiu-jitsu. It was just much easier than it was just physically easier to do the movements than anything else. All other martial arts. It's actually a weird thing. In boxing and wrestling, a big part, even in Muay Thai, a big part of the session is conditioning. So you might be doing sit-ups, rope jumps. You're doing a lot of like just basic conditioning workouts. And in jiu-jitsu, it was like roll on the ground, roll your back. It was much easier to do. And now a lot of schools you don't even do warm-ups. Like there's the pros and cons to that. In jiu-jitsu, it's unique because the quantity of information you need to have is extremely high. That's not to say there's a lot to learn in all of them, but even in running, like people, I assume there's only so many ways you can really run, and there might be some. I'm sure there's technique to it, and there's some differences. But in jiu-jitsu, it can be wildly different. In MMA, even more so. But I think in jiu-jitsu, there's just because there's not so much striking, you could have two guys and they're going in very different ways. So that's a unique.
Hmm.
That's also why there's way more opportunity for someone who wants to teach jiu-jitsu because there's just so much more information, and also it's because there's so much to learn. Not everybody can get very competent in all the areas, so you can have your own little niches that you can be good at. Learn
Yeah, it's very. Sorry, say that last part again.
the project of like learning jiu-jitsu and devising a style that's very interesting. It's a very interesting project. It's like it could take decades, and you and I can come up with very different end pieces. Even though we're both
Hmm.
doing jiu-jitsu, the actual things we're doing, techniques we're doing, could be worlds apart.
Yeah, man, that's interesting. That is interesting. And it's interesting. I am a running coach and I understand like there are small elements of technique that you can change to make yourself more efficient. But when you see someone run, you recognize it and you go, okay, like that's pretty much, if you look at a field of runners, you go, okay, they're all doing pretty much the same movement. So
Mm.
you look at a jiu-jitsu, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the thing that stands out to me, or the thing that I've heard about jiu-jitsu as well, it's not only the movements that you're trying to navigate your way through, but it's also the speed with which you've got to adjust and respond to a particular move that
Yeah.
comes against you. So obviously you've got your technique, but then like with the competitor that you're trying to go up against, you have to adjust and navigate your way through that fight, not just with what works for you, but what is the most effective way to counter their move. Is that right?
If you can distill it, like distill all of it into like a two sentences, it'd basically be one, having very good memory, so you can know basically all the moves. Like, what are all the plays? What do I do in each situation? And once you have that, then it's just a matter of identifying the situation and doing the correct response. Because there's like
Mm.
it's already been worked out basically in jiu-jitsu. Like that's the difference between jiu-jitsu and I guess comedy. Like comedy, you have to write your own joke. In jiu-jitsu, no. What you have to do is just do what the best guy in the world is doing, and try to replicate it as close as to that, accounting for changes in body type. But if the guy you're replicating it and it's going to work really well for you, chances are you're going to have a similar physical attributes, build, limb length, etc. And
Because
that's
when you say it like that, I was going to say, when you say it like that, it sounds as though you would expect everyone's technique to end up just being as close to the best person in the world, from the last 10 years. So, like, where does that individualized
that
technique come out?
that's where the thing is. What is successful at the highest level changes so rapidly, because the thing with because fighting is the urgency with which you have to respond. Like it's not as much as MMA where you'll get knocked unconscious, but there are consequences. Like you could get your leg torn or whatever. So as soon as something is very successful, it's like a virus where there's like the people develop immunity immediately. You will not be successful doing the same thing over and over again. You have to be more subtle with it, because it's just people catch on. There's people right now, kids who've been pulled out of school who are watching hours of tape a day, and if they can understand what you're going to do and you're predictable, then you just develop a response to it. And then when you hit that move, that's the problem. Now there's new information in the knowledge bank. That's why the knowledge bank must be ever expanding, taking on new information as well as retaining the current information. Of course, some things are like the sport is newer than, let's say, wrestling or boxing. Wrestling and boxing has been worked out to a greater degree because there's been organized rule sets, like with Olympic boxing and Olympic wrestling. Those rule sets have been around for longer, so it's been worked out to a greater degree. Groundwork specifically, at, like with what the Gracies did, this is really like a very more current evolution of martial arts. It's almost like we have the water, we have land, we have the space. It's almost like a whole another area has opened up, uh, that people can learn about and do. So it's a very unique thing. It's a very amazing thing. It's definitely something I think is worth doing with my time,
Mm.
which is
Yeah, that's
hard
interesting.
to explain to some people because obviously, like my parents, they to a lot of people who just don't value it. Like I remember my mum was on a phone call, like she is now, like I am with you now, and I was mucking around, and I came up behind her and I grabbed her neck and I like squeezed her face a little bit. And she got really mad. Fair enough. You probably shouldn't do that to people. But there's a lot of people who, when I do that to them, they become really happy and they really like me, and they might give me money and prizes, and they think it's the best thing in the world. There's people who dedicate their lives to like just learning how to arrange their arms around somebody's neck, and this takes up hours of their time, years of their life. So it's all about again being in an environment and community where that's valued. With my mom, who doesn't really not care much about jiu-jitsu, she doesn't care about how crisp and clean my rear naked choke was. A lot of people, like they would pay a lot of money to like learn exactly what to do and figure things out. Like it's all about what you value.
Mm. What's the separation between time that you're actually practicing physically, like on the mats rolling with other athletes, and the time that you put in studying? Like, is it an equal amount at home? Like the example you gave before about the young kids watching hours of tape before
It
they get onto the
very
mat.
yeah. It really varies athlete to athlete. There are people who watch little to no tape. A lot of people struggle, especially with phones. I really struggle myself to sit down and put in the time watching. And but there are people who can watch 5, 8, 10 hours of tape. So those people have a very distinct advantage, at least when it comes to taking on that, increasing that memory bank. Now, you can also, it's a very unique situation, but you could maybe, let's say your brother or someone in your immediate family has that information and they just tell it to you. So they spend a lot of time with you. Most of my learning has been one on one, in person with a coach, where that person had the information, and there's a lot of value to that. You're far less likely to become distracted. If I'm watching videos on my overall, I think if you could just pay more attention and be less ADHD, the medium of videos is the best because I can pause you, I can replay it, I can go over it. Whereas generally the way you receive instruction in jiu-jitsu is one coach demonstrating with a partner, talking it through, and a class of whatever 10, 100 people. And because it's a class setting, sure you could potentially interrupt the class and ask a question, but it's like that's how many times are you going to do that? You don't want to annoy people. The instruction is also not tailored to you. Ideally, you would have a guy who is world class, who just spent all his time, hours a day with you, just teaching you and then watching you, and then that would be like you have a dedicated guy. But other than
Yeah.
that, learning, I don't know. I've kind of lost my train of thought. I've gone to.
No, it's a good point, man. Like, there's so many different
Sorry, you.
ways to learn, and
I remembered your question. What's the distinction? So yeah, it varies person to person. There are obviously, I think, some activities that are more beneficial than others. So just like, in the comedy, writing jokes, whatever, watching a stand-up special makes you better at comedy, but doesn't make you as good as getting up on stage every night. I don't think so. So I think the number one thing is turning up on the mats and then trying your techniques against people who are, other athletes, like trying to hit the moves, and then building that up is the process. It's like same as taking like a joke, like taking it and then making it like a great joke. Is I have to take a technique and then I have to slowly start with people who are not very good and hit it on them and hit it on them and then slowly build up until hopefully you get a move that you're so good at it you could potentially hit it on anybody in the world.
yeah, so that's actually a pattern of improvement. You'll start a new move with someone who's not as experienced as you.
Yes, that's why those people are very important. It's not just the people in the room who are, who've got decades of experience or extreme skill. You need to have all of the ranks so you can slowly, and you need people to give you specific reactions to techniques so you can learn how to overcome those techniques. Because it's always an exchange at a high level. I do something, you do something, I do something. That's actually I'm pretty sure a Helson Gracie quote. Jiu-Jitsu is I do something, you do something, I do something, you do something forever. Because if we're good enough, it's like a
Perfect.
tennis. I won't drop the ball, you won't drop the ball either, because that's a go. And that's why you can have jiu-jitsu matches that are hours and hours long, though it's not usually the format, usually the set time. But you can have matches. I've got friends of mine who've had matches for hours because you just keep outplaying each other, and sometimes you're really good. You negate each other's technique to the point that something meaningless does play more of a role. Because if we're both so good, then a 1% advantage, like being more flexible, having better cardio, being more hydrated, I don't know, the texture of the mat could have an impact on the outcome.
Yeah, man, it's such a wild sport. I love that quote. Like, I do something, you do something. What a cool way to put it. What is I love a good simple breakdown of what could be a really complex conversation. I do something, you do something. But if you want to know more, ask me questions. Like, there's so much within that. So, dude, tell me a little bit more about this competition you're in Texas for at the moment. It's how far into it are you? It looks like you've had a few fights already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm just here at the B team, part of the day-to-day schedule, the classes. I've got a guy on Sunday who's a pretty tough up-and-coming guy. He trains at the other big, sort of one of the better-known gyms here in the world, New Wave Jiu-Jitsu with John Danaher and Gordon. So, yeah, look, I honestly, I definitely, I really respect this guy. He's super tough, and I'm just curious to see the outcome. So it's cool. I definitely don't have the same kind of opportunities back in Australia. It's just I'm not in a place where I can be around so many jiu-jitsu events. Like there's competitions here. You could compete 3-4 times a week. Where back in Australia, it'd be hard to do that a month. Like there's competition, they're less so. It's harder to get to. You got to travel more. Whereas this place is really a hotbed of training. There's so many good gyms here because these guys have just rocked up. And now there's just such a flight. And even Austin, the city, there's so many people here from everywhere. And the people who are many of the people around the world who are very serious about jiu-jitsu, whether they were in Florida or Europe or Australia or wherever, they've just picked up their stuff and come here because it's like, who better to tell you how to do it than the person who's done it?
Wow. So is that a recent move? Because I know every comedian in the world's gone to Texas or gone to
Yeah.
Austin just because it's the new hotbed. And man, if it wasn't so far away and I didn't have such a good relationship with my mum and my family for that matter, I'd be I would be right there with you. But I think it'd be tough to explain to my wife and two kids why I'm moving to Austin, Texas. I think they'd have to come with me. But have you noticed or have you heard that like a whole lot of people from different fields have come there recently, or has it always been known as one of the go-to places?
No, I think I mean, depends how long back you go. I speak to people who are here, a decade ago, and obviously there wasn't that. For years, I'd heard on the Rogan podcast, I'd hear about Austin here and there, and people would say it was a cool place. I'm sure a lot of the locals probably didn't even like them mentioning that it was a kind of a cool hip place, always like a kind of a liberal city in an otherwise conservative state. But more recently, for whatever reason, I mean, I just know it through podcasts and kind of the comedy world because I'm in that. But people have been flocking here. I'm not too sure why, but I meet musicians, Uber driver, because I'm getting around in Uber. So many of my Uber drivers, they're trying to become comics. They're trying to become musicians. This is apparently the live music capital of the world. There's a lot of people here for jiu-jitsu, and yeah, I think a lot of people came here because this place really stayed open through much of COVID, which I know you had your little.
Did you see that?
I loved it. I loved it. I'm too much of a pussy to.
Oh, no, I would have been if it was your status. I wouldn't have gone near it either. I would have said, "No,
And
Bobby can get stuff. He's in it by himself."
they're like, you got to get the injections to get to Austin. I was like, I was, we were all. It's amazing. It was only such a short period ago of how fed up we were just being put in freaking pens.
Dude, it was wild. It was so wild. It was so funny. Like that status that I put up. I thought when I put that up, so like a little bit of context, I was freaking out because I was listening to what's that North Korean chick's name? She's living in America now. She's been on
Yes,
Rogan
yes.
once or twice.
I know who you.
Anyway, I was listening to a podcast with her and Rogan, and this is in like lockdown 5. And I
Right.
was like, all right, no one is seems to be asking any questions. So many people I knew and so many of my friends were like, okay, well, I guess we just keep locking down for as long as they tell us to. And I was sitting there going, I can't fucking believe what is happening. Like it was staggering to
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
Bro, like more context. The first lockdown, first two, I was right there with everyone. I was like, hey, I'm getting home. I'm washing my hands to my elbow. I'm changing my outfit. I'll listen to what you say.
Yeah.
After about 3, I started to go, hang on a second. What are we doing? Like this, and I started to hear about places like
Yeah.
Florida and Texas and Oregon or Southern Oregon, where my brother-in-law is, and these people just laughing at Australia, and I was starting to get all
Wow.
embarrassed. Anyway, then this podcast came on, and this chick started talking about the gradual tiptoe of the North Korean government into this full-blown dictatorship, and then I went down one too many rabbit holes and started
Oh.
going, wait, are we going? Is that where we're going? So,
Wow.
I could have done with like a little bit of meditation
It
at the time,
goes-
but I remember getting home. I actually pulled my car over. Sorry, you go.
Yeah. Go on. No, you go on. You pulled your car over.
Oh, sorry, bro. I lost you. There's a little lag just there. Yeah, I pulled my car over because I just had to get it off my chest, and I put that status up. And I remember I got home about 45 minutes later, and the thing had just blown up. Like apparently every comic in the
Oh.
world loved it. But the thing was, I was getting so many messages from people going, "Bro, I'm right on your side, but get stuff. I'm not touching it. I'm not touching it." And I was like, "No, I don't blame you. I wouldn't touch it either." But
Yeah.
yeah, bro. It was I don't know what made me go down that rabbit hole or what you just said, but you triggered a nerve in me that yeah, it was oh, that's right. That was one of the reasons that sort of Austin got like a little bit more of a reputation through lockdowns because they had the flip side of the coin to what Melbourne decided to take. So yeah, I think I moved out of Melbourne with my family. I'm in Point Lonsdale now. I'm actually in Queenscliff, which ironically,
Okay.
and I have no problem with this, is the most vaccinated area in all of Australia, which is so ironic that I moved here.
Wow.
But I moved here with the intention of just escaping some of the crazy. Also, the oldest population, I think, in a lot of towns in Australia. But then, isn't it funny, bro? Like, we won't go down the rabbit hole because everything will get deleted off YouTube if you talk about it. But now, even
uh,
I was laughing because even my mum, a couple of about 6 months ago, who was like, Tice, I didn't know you're an anti-vaxxer. I'm like, mate, look at my first kid. Like he got his vaccine. I am now, but originally I wasn't.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was funny now. She's like, yeah, I don't think I'll get the 5th one. And I'm like, hang on a second. Like you called me crazy for not taking the health advice just a couple of years ago. What are you doing? You got to get the 5th one. You got to stay loyal, mate. Anyway, bro, you've unpacked some pent up emotion within
Wow.
the body of Tyson Popplestone. I didn't know that was still there.
They they can get away with anything. And we think, oh, how did they do it? How did they kill all these people and do this, do that? If the time comes, if the circumstances are correct, I always think I'm like, if the Chinese invaded, I'd be speaking Chinese. It just be
Yes.
how it is. And unless you're like They are obviously people who seem to be built different. There's like heroes who seem to do incredible things in incredible times, but far out. Yeah, I've been watching The Last of Us. So I'm in a bit of a dystopian kind of thing at the moment.
What's it called? What are you watching?
The Last of Us. It's a zombie thing,
Right, I need to
like a
check it
zombie
out.
TV.
Maybe give me another 6 months to start watching it. It sounds like I just need a little bit more breathing space before I start
You
getting
should,
out these zombie apocalypse shows.
you should go do a class. Go do a trial somewhere. Try it.
Dude, I think I will. I think I will. I've been saying this for a while. Like I know I messaged you a few months ago. I'm very, very keen to get my boys involved for the same reason that you mentioned uh, your desire got triggered by a school fight. I love the idea of discipline and respect, and I love the idea of like the confidence that it will still instill in my two boys. Hopefully, to know that in a lot of situations they can defend themselves, but also just like the physical benefits. And my boys are both like they're just your stereotype boys. They're ADD. They've got so much energy. They need to do something with it. I'd rather him have like a really respectable figure who's dedicated his life to teaching or fighting. Trying
Yeah,
to just guide my boys in these areas. And I don't know if this is true all across the board, but it also seems like a sport which garners. It seems like a very respectful sport. I've heard a lot of martial artists speak like across a breadth of different formats, and a lot of the elite guys, they seem to be very thoughtful, strong, fit,
yeah.
respectful people, and they're all things that get sort of the tick of my approval.
I've got to go soon, but I'll leave you on this. I think I compare it to like basic arithmetic. Like, there's no way you would let a kid get away, get out of primary school, not know how to do basic, 10 plus whatever, 50. I feel like not knowing how to like get out of, if people grab you in certain ways, how to break their grip, if someone's holding you down in specific ways, how to get up, get away from that person, how to correctly cover up your head if someone's punching you, how to throw basic 1-2 punch. I think a lot of this stuff should just be basic know-how as a human being. Like, as a human being, there's only so many ways that are really effective in like restraining people, or in those kinds of situations, or how to correctly position yourself. If you think someone might hit you, they're about to hit you, and that stuff could easily be, the most important information you need to know in a given situation. Now the question is, how likely is that situation? And we thankfully we live in pretty good times, and it is pretty unlikely. In fact, I think you're more likely to get injured by consistently training a combat sport than you are not doing it, because most people don't get maimed in some kind of physical altercation. But of course, that's where the other benefits of it come into play, all the mental and spiritual benefits.
Yeah, well said, bro. Well said, man. Well, dude, I'm not going to hold you up. I know you got things to do. What time is it over there now?
6:15. I've got some people
6:50.
waiting for me.
Dinner time, brother. You get out there, man. Thanks so much for coming on. Good luck Sunday, brother.
Good chat. Thanks, brother. Take care.
Right back at you, man.